Hello, my name is George Thornton, and I am an advanced Cicerone and a national ranked BJCP judge. This video is for you if you are either studying for Cicerone or the BJCP or anything related to beer certification programs, or if you're just simply interested in beer and you want to watch some reviews with somebody who's gone through those programs and you want to learn a little bit more about it. So today we are going to be tasting a very special beer. This is the Trappist Westvleteren 12 from the monks at St. Sixtus in Belgium. And this beer is Trappist certified, which means that they are actual monks who brew the beer. They have this special label, which actually is a European Union protected designation. So you can't use this term or have this label if you're not an actual authentic Trappist brewery. It also means that the monks are in charge of overseeing the brewing process, and that the proceeds, for the most part, go to first, charitable needs, and then also just sustaining the livelihood or the sort of monkish activities for those who live in the monastery. And there's a lot of copycats for these styles. The copycats tend to be a little bit more sweet, which you could say would be more like crowd pleasing, while the authentic versions tend to be a bit more dry, or you would say more palatable, which means that they tend to go great with food, and they tend to have very expressive yeast characteristics, etc. But other than that, the Trappist style doesn't really have to fall into any sort of category. But the Beer Judge certification program does its best to just sort of take a snapshot of what's currently being done, what's popular, what's on the store shelves, what you can find from these breweries, and sort of categorize them so that we know sort of what a good example would taste like. This example is probably the hardest one to get in the United States. In Europe, you can find this pretty readily. I picked this up from my local homebrew shop here in Madrid, called Beer-Cation. I'll tag them just so you know. But this is a 10.2% alcohol beer. It falls into the Belgian dark strong ale category. It's actually one of the BJCP listed recommendations for this category. And yeah, let's get into it. Let's try it. So you can see it has this cool little neck collar here that has Trappistina on the, or Trappisten beer on the glass. It's pouring kind of a dark copper, more mahogany sort of color. You can see the foams building up pretty quickly there as I pour gently. And the foam itself is more of a sort of tan, light brown. And the head, you can see, is very frothy, foamy, a lot of fisheye bubbles clinging on the glass. Let me see if I get that focused for you. And already it appears to be a fairly persistent head. It poured a pretty thick head. Already seems like it has some lively carbonation. Let's dig into the aroma. So I should mention, what I'm doing with these videos is trying to run through more of a BJCP style breakdown of the beer. So we're going to touch aroma, appearance, flavor, mouthfeel, and overall impression. And I'm going to assign intensity markers for those. So if you're studying for these exams, you can start practicing just using that vocabulary. And I'm going to do my best to use an extensive vocabulary and be as precise as I can. Of course, kind of doing these in the moment and under a video with, maybe a little bit more anxiety than I normally would be in a normal judging situation. But the point is to give you the opportunity to kind of taste along with me. So let's go into the aroma. So the first thing I'm picking up is a lot of like really dark fruit, and dark fruit that seems like it's been sitting on the counter for a while. So overripe dark fruit. And when I say dark fruit, I should expand on that. So I'm thinking of figs, prunes, plum, I know those are kind of coming from the same territory, but also date. And those characteristics could be coming from the yeast. They could be coming from the dark Belgian candy sugars that's typical for this style, or even potentially some darker malts. As a judge, it's not my job to try to like guess what the recipe is. I'm just using kind of universal knowledge about the style to sort of try to guess like where the flavors might be coming from. So so that dark fruit, I'm going to assign to maybe malt and or like candy sugars. And the intensity, and this is really important, the intensity and the aroma for this dark fruit or like malty, sugary characteristic is in the medium territory. So it's always important that we just pick a lane. So I'm going to say medium. I'm not going to say, oh, it's light to medium. I'm going to say medium. I'm going to pick that lane. And so I can write that on my score sheet. So medium malt / sugar characteristics of dark fruit. I need to expand on that. I'm also getting some pear, apple, and I get a light touch of pepper, like black pepper to be specific, star of anise, and a little touch of clove. Now that clove is probably coming from some yeast characteristic, but it could also be coming from the dark candy sugar. And I'm also getting some sort of like rose water, or like rose petal, floral, a little bit of potpourri. You know, grandma always had potpourri sitting in a bowl, so that memory is kind of stuck, that flavor memory is kind of stuck for me. But I get a little bit of that, you know, in that mix, that potpourri mix, she had like cinnamon sticks and that sort of stuff. So I'm getting a little bit of that, like that vibe. So I might even start going into like sort of pumpkin spice, allspice, clove, cinnamon. And this could be a mix of yeast characteristics and malt characteristics. It's actually, for me, it gets me excited when I don't know exactly where the flavors are coming from, because that's telling me they're using all the ingredients to kind of create this like really nice blended thing. So on a score sheet, I'm probably going to write, you know, that medium malt / candy sugar characteristics of that dark fruit, etc., that I already mentioned. And I'll say mingling with medium phenolic and estery yeast profiles. Phenolic is going to be those things that are like the pepper and the clove and the allspice. And the estery profiles are going to be the things like pear, apple, you know, the fruity sort of characteristics. But I can't just say fruity. I need to say something that's a bit more specific, like pear, apple, etc. Apricot is definitely coming through here. But I'm just kind of running through my Rolodex of you know, being at like the market or the fruit stand or walking through the grocery store and just kind of smelling things and just kind of see if like, you know, is that there? Do I get that? Yes, no. You know, I don't get a lot of banana, for instance, right? If I do get banana, it's more of like a kind of an overripe banana characteristic. But the main thing for me is that dark fruit. And now I'm kind of thinking of like, a little bit of that like purple Big League Chew bubblegum, which, you know, was one of my favorites as a kid. So I might just say bubblegum. So if you haven't had Big League Chew bubblegum, you're not going to say, you know, it's kind of like grape bubblegum. Okay, so I've described yeast and malt. Let me see if I can find any sort of hop character. So I'm going to sort of put my brain, do I get any sort of like herbal, minty, piney, citrusy characteristics that could be coming from the hops? Let's look for it. So I do get a low herbal sort of characteristic, but again, this could be coming from all of the anise and the dark fruit and the cinnamon, all that sort of stuff. That could be kind of being, you know, telling my brain this sort of overall like herbal plant sort of material. So if it's not really distinct, then I'll say on my score sheet, you know, like hops very low with a low herbal characteristic that appears to be blending with the characteristics that I described from the malt or the yeast. That's totally fair. So on aroma, we've covered malt, hops, yeast. That's very important. We've assigned intensities to all of those, and then we've tried to give some descriptors to help myself and the consumer or the person who brewed the beer, if I'm doing a score sheet, trying to help them know what I'm perceiving here. So now let's go into the flavor. Always a nice big swig, swish it around. I'm kind of gathering information right now for the mouthfeel part, which is going to come up next. I'm kind of already noting some of the astringency and the carbonation, that sort of stuff. But at the same time, I'm allowing this to really like become a part of my palate, or for my palate to really pick it up from all over. So like the tongue, the gums, I'm swishing it around. I want to feel what this beer feels like. And that's also going to help my senses detect a little bit more. Most importantly, my olfactory bulb, which is right behind my little nose here. Maybe it's a big nose, I don't know. But the olfactory bulb, to help it do its job the most, I'm going to take another little sip, and then I'm going to breathe out my nose right after I swallow. And this is going to help all those volatile molecules that are in this beer go right past my olfactory bulb as I breathe out through my nose. And that's going to send a lot of information to the front of my brain, which is going to help me kind of pick apart what I'm actually tasting, or actually what flavors I'm getting, because we only taste a few things. We'll do a separate video on taste versus flavor, but here we go. Okay, so my first thought is that I'm getting like this black licorice, star of anise, cinnamon, allspice, clove, pear, fig, date. So a lot of those flavors we were describing before, but now those flavors seem a little bit more intense for me. So on the aroma, I called them at like medium, and now I want to say medium plus. So I can write all the things on my score sheet that I first detect, and then I could say, derived from, malt, appears to be derived from malts and like dark candy sugars. Or I can kind of think of all those things and say medium plus malt / sugar profile, and then in parentheses or described as, I can kind of add all those descriptors that I already said. I want to add some yeast characteristic to this too. So for the yeast, I need to look for any sort of like phenolic, which would be those peppery, spicy sort of things, and then any sort of fruity sort of things. So like pear, apple, peach, could be plum, but the plum could be coming from that dark candy sugar. Again, a beer where we don't really know where everything's coming from, and I think that's what makes these beers so special. But in addition to that, I'm getting a little bit of like rose, peppery, like alcohol. So there's parts of this, excuse me, little burp for you there, a little carbonation. But there's parts of this that have this like peppery element that could be coming from some of those like dark candy sugars or from the malts. Hey, it could even be coming from a little bit of hop characteristic, which we haven't talked about yet. But it could also be coming from actual like alcohol. And sometimes alcohol can give us this really nice like floral potpourri and sort of peppery sort of characteristics. And our job is just to do our best to describe what we are perceiving. And for me, what I perceive from this is a little bit of like alcohol flavor that I would describe how I just described it. And the intensity, very important, I would say is in the medium plus. For all the beers that I've consumed in my life, the intensity of those alcohol-derived flavors is medium plus. So now, does that mean it's good or bad? No, it's just my observation. That's the only thing I'm doing right now. I'm not talking about whether or not this is a good beer or anything. I've dropped some hints already, but so we described the malt / candy sugar characteristics. We described the yeast. Now my hops. I want to talk about hop flavor. I want to look for it, see if I can find it, but I also need to look for bitterness. And so the bitterness might be a little tricky because I'm looking for astringency. That's a sign of hop-derived astringency or bitterness. But astringency can come from other places. But I'm going to do my best to take another swig and see if I can pinpoint where the hop-derived bitterness is from. Maybe I can't, maybe I can. It doesn't really matter. My goal is to see what I perceive and describe that. So I do detect astringency. I'm going to talk about that in mouthfeel, but I feel like the astringency is coming more from the alcohol itself The alcohol warmth is noticeable. It seems to be a part of what this beer is, and that's perfectly fine. But the hop-derived bitterness, based on my experience with kind of calibrating my palate to pick up hop-derived bitterness versus roasted malt derived astringency or bitterness versus phenolic or yeast kind of alcohol derived astringency slash bitterness, they kind of mix with each other. I'm going to say that the hop derived bitterness here is low. So my hop description, which I always have to include on a score sheet, regardless of whether or not I can taste it or not, my hop derived or my hop description is low hop derived bitterness with no perceivable hop derived floral or any sort of character, right? So if I perceive no, that's my perception, and that's important. If you don't perceive something, you don't leave it out of your notes. You make that observation because it's very important to make those observations. In the end, and I'm gonna, throughout my next million videos of beer tastings, I'm always gonna harp on this. In the end, every beer style is just based on balance. Is it a hop balanced beer, a malt balanced beer, or a yeast balanced beer, or other? And so if you perceive no or none, it's very important, but you have to write that. So hop derived, bitterness, low, hop flavor, none. Someone else could write hop flavor very low and they can write a description. That's fine. We're pretty close with each other on that perception. It doesn't really matter, but I have to write it. Okay. Now, if someone did say hop derived flavor very high, okay, now we're different story. But we'll stay on track talking about this beer. So I've talked about yeast, malt, hops, other. I might look for some deficiencies, which on the aroma, I wasn't really digging that deep for any deficiencies per se. We definitely smell a lot of things like phenol, banana. These things are in the standard off flavor, but they're not deficiencies per se. But right now, I'm really more focused on what I'm perceiving. So I do want to ask myself, diacetyl? No. Alcohol flavors? Yes. There's definitely alcohol in this beer. It's 10.2%. But the alcohol smells very pleasant. It's like the difference between having a really nice whiskey and a very bad whiskey. You always smell the alcohol, but sometimes the quality of how the alcohol is produced can bring about very pleasant things like pepper and rose petal, or it can bring about very gross, astringent nail polish type of things. Sometimes nail polish is great. Whatever, I'm getting derailed. So now I need to talk about balance. So on the score sheet, you'll see there's a part in the flavor for balance. It's really important that you talk about balance. For me, again, balance is the thing that makes every single beer style. It doesn't matter what the beer style is. If you can focus on what is the balance of this beer, you're probably going to narrow down what the beer style is. So I'm going to take another little sip here. Okay, the balance. And what I mean by balance is what's the main character of this beer? If this was a movie or a TV show or whatever, a play in this beer, who's the main actor? Is it the malt? Is it the hops? Is it the yeast? In this case, I'm going to say it's the yeast, because the thing that kind of talks to me the most is the alcohol warmth, the things that are coming more and more across as phenols or types of alcohol flavors. So the peppery, the floral, some of those fruity characteristics. So I'm going to say it's a yeast forward beer, but it's very well supported, and all those yeast flavors are mingling really well with that dark candy sugar. So all that fig and prune and even some floral characteristics could be coming from that dark candy sugar. The beautiful thing with how this beer is made is that I can't really tell. And sometimes it's just really nice when the brewer is able to put all these flavors in there, give you enough information for you to know, like, hey, a lot of these flavors are coming from the yeast, the alcohol, the phenols, the esters, but it's also so well blended and mixed with the other components happening that you can't really tell for certain. For me, that's always a good sign of a really fantastic beer. But so my balance, yeast forward beer. That's it. That's all I have to say. Okay. So then we go to mouthfeel. So I need to talk about astringency, kind of lingering mouth sensations, carbonation, creaminess, body. This is a medium body experience for me. The dryness, so in terms of sweetness or dry, or not sweet, I should say, it's dry. However, that perception, I could say it's like my initial perception is that it's dry. I get a little bit of lingering kind of like tackiness on my palate, which tells me it could be alcohol that's sort of like creating the sensation of like kind of drying out, kind of pulling, almost this tannic-like sensation. Yeast phenols can also create this tannic-like sensation, which is similar to like what the sensation of hop-derived bitterness gives us. So we have this problem of like, I don't exactly know where all this is coming from, but my perception, and right now I'm just talking about my perception. That's the important thing for my score sheet. So I'm going to say that my for my dryness, I'm going to say perceived very dry, but with a very lingering, like a very light or very low lingering little bit of sweetness. But that's also being accompanied by this drying alcohol warmth. And so my alcohol warmth is medium plus. If someone were to say high, I would say that's fine, but I'm going to say medium plus. And body, medium. Carbonation, high. When I kind of swish it in my mouth, it kind of like expands a little bit, and more than a little bit. It kind of expands quite a bit. So that for me kind of tells me, okay, it's medium high, and or high. And what am I missing? Astringency. Yeah, so astringency, this is kind of coming from some of the alcohol, so I'm going to say medium astringency. And the sensation of astringency is like this kind of, if you've had a really tannic wine, or if you can find some like good oak cubes or oak chips and you just kind of put them in your mouth for a little bit, you'll get this like very like drying, puckering sensation. Or if you've had just grapevines, like, or grapes straight off the vine, and you get sometimes this really just like mouth puckering. It's not sour per se. There might be some acidity with it, sure, but really the sensation of like this drying out, like your whole palate, your tongue, your gums, everything is just sort of like begging for water. That is astringency. And so if you learn to kind of dial in what that sensation is, then you can start to kind of pinpoint it a little bit more. But the astringency on this, and it's derived from the alcohol, so it's a phenolic derived astringency as well as the alcohol derived astringency. So it's, again, yeast forward kind of things happening here. And that astringency is medium plus, going out on a limb there. So I've hit all of the BJCP kind of markers. I've assigned intensities to all of those things. I've talked about balance, etc. Now I need to write my overall impression. And the overall impression for me always starts with my elevator pitch, or what I call my menu board descriptor. So if I were working at a bar and I just tapped this beer or just started serving this beer, and I needed to write something on the menu so that the customer or the guest could know what to expect, I want to be able to describe that in just like a few words. 5 words would be great. Sometimes I need a couple sentences to really get it out, but I'm going to see what I get. Yeast forward dry Belgian beer with loads of dark fruit. That would probably be where I would start with my menu descriptor. I might expand on that and say, loads of dark fruit, including like, fig and date. Earlier I was talking about the banana. At first I wasn't really like pinpoint, like honing in on the banana, but now I'm really getting this like super overripe banana, but it seems to me like it's like very alcohol derived, and I love it. It's very nice. And then, I would just say like, yeah, this is a very nice beer. It's a little boozy, but it seems fit for the style, and very drinkable, very dangerous. I gotta say, I feel like you're witnessing me like get hammered here. This beer is like delicious. I honestly don't go for beers that are over the 6% mark that often, because a lot of times they're just booze bombs or they're sugar bombs, and I just really don't enjoy the experience. But I gotta say, I'm really, really loving this beer. So in terms of, let me see, I'm gonna check my BJCP notes here. The overall impression written by BJCP is a dark, complex, very strong Belgian ale with a delicious blend of malt richness, dark fruit flavors, and spicy elements. Complex, rich, smooth, and dangerous. So maybe some of my descriptors for the overall kind of came close to that. I feel like pretty close. If I were studying for the exam, that would be the thing I would really try to hone in on, is like, how do you just describe this beer? Like, what is a Belgian dark strong? But I'll do a different video maybe on those sort of tips. So yeah, I think we did it. 26 plus minutes in, and we have hopefully a helpful descriptor of the Westvleteren 12, a fantastic beer. Like, subscribe, all that nonsense. You can go to george.com. Yeah, that's George, yes, George.com. And check out any other articles that I'll be building up. Also including a trip to this place where this beer is made, which I'll be starting this year, 2023, to make ourselves not evergreen. And over the next few years, building those up, and hoping to have you join me on some trips around, the world, tasting beers and sitting down at the places where these come from, enjoying them with the food where these beers are also made, and just learning to connect to our world a little bit through the responsible appreciation of beers like these. So thanks for watching. Let me know if you would like me to review something else. I definitely do intend to pick up another one of these bottles and compare it to the St. Bernardus 12, which for a while they actually made for Westvleteren, and see how that goes. But that's it for now. Thank you, and share this, whatever. Do that sort of stuff. Go to george.com. Ciao.